welcome to JDN's panel discussion on communications and development, how to be strategic and get it right. For those of you who work with nonprofits, I'm sure this challenge is very familiar. I'm sure you've struggled in the past with communicating your cause or your organization effectively. So hopefully our panel today will make things slightly easier for you. We've got, let me introduce our panel to you. We've got Patrick Searle, co-founder and CEO of GetCraft, Southeast Asia's premier content and media network. He has in the past worked with Ogilvy as managing director of social at Ogilvy, Indonesia. He has also helped WNK Shanghai set up and lead their first digital teams for Nike, Umbro, and Fiat. At the moment, he also runs 2 meetups, Jakarta Content Marketing and Philippines Content Marketing. We've also got Ong Hock Chuan, an experienced journalist who's worked previously in Malaysia, Hong Kong, and Taiwan, and now a PR professional. He is the co-founder of Maverick, a Singapore-based firm, a communications consultancy. Oh, sorry, Indonesian-based communications consultancy. Sorry, not Singapore. We've also got our moderator and panelist today, Rebecca Lake. Rebecca currently works for UNDP's Good Growth Partnership, and in the past she has also helped support the launch of Indonesia's palm oil platform, what is now known as Foxbee, who I work quite closely with via UNDP's Sustainable Palm Oil Initiative. So, and finally, let me not forget our sponsors tonight, AsiaWorks. AsiaWorks is a digital firm, a media firm, that has done, over the past 2 decades, some great work for clients such as UNDP, UNHCR, and Red Cross. If you have any media-based practical questions, I'm sure Nadia can help you with some of your answers. So without any more delays, I'd like to pass on the mic to Rebecca, who will now lead the panel. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Janvi, for such a great introduction. Now I don't have to do it, so that's great. So as you obviously all know, we're here to talk about strategic communications, and we will talk about communications in general, but particularly for the development sector. And I think one of the reasons why this panel came about is I could almost say there's a misunderstanding about communications and development, and where we can use these kind of tools, and what role communications actually plays in development. So that's why we decided to have this panel today, because it's a great opportunity to kind of show everyone what the potential is when it comes to communications, and really get down to the basics in a way. What does it take to have an effective communications plan for your organization? And I think one of the challenges that we'll talk about today is there's just such an array of possibilities when it comes to communicating, especially in this digital age. We've got options at our fingertips, so it's a little bit hard to know where to look or what to do in the first place. So that's what we really want to talk about. We want to get down to the basics and think about what are the key strategic things that you could do as an organization. And I hope that in these 30 minutes, we can jam-pack some tips and some insights that you can take away to your own organizations and begin implementing. So I guess without further ado, you've already had a great introduction to Patrick and Ong. So I think I might just start with the first question. And we were talking about before how we should introduce this panel, and again, we go back to the basics. So what is communications? Do you want to start, Patrick?
Sure. So the question, I guess, the question actually we originally spoke about, which is what is communications in development, right? And I think, by the way, before we start this, me and Ong have semi-decided this is going to be an R-rated panel, so there will be swearing going on in this, all right? So just so you know, or I've decided, Ong, I hope it's decided. I hope you consent on this one. So I think what's really interesting that we were chatting about before is there's communications in development. I think the really the interesting thing to look in is about communications in general, and fundamentally what is actually happening, as you succinctly spoke about, is that it's very messed up. Actually, marketers, people in the communication business, are very confused because there are so many different channels out there, and essentially we've been blindsided. We've got these bright, sparkly things that have gone there and actually got shone in our face. There's Facebook, Google, etc., and these sound fantastic and they go there and excite you, but actually the core principles of marketing has been lost, which is actually frustrating because there is huge amounts of value in doing comms and marketing work, but we've lost that. And I think to your question of like, what is comms, that's more about saying actually, bigger question here, what is the purpose of comms? The purpose of comms is to go there and actually solve your communications objective. That's pretty much it, and then we can elaborate from that. So.
Sounds good. So, okay, as you heard again, it's a broad issue. Maybe you want to elaborate. I guess we get a little bit provocative here, but what's the current landscape when it comes to communications? And then maybe you have some examples on some of the development clients you've worked with. What are the key issues?
Okay, I think where the communications landscape is that brands, organizations that used to be in power have actually died, and they do not know it. They do not have control. Who has control is every one of you that has a smartphone. So the control actually has left brands and organizations, and it's gone to the consumers, the people. So before, it was very acceptable, for instance, to blast advertising at them, to preach to them, and to kind of like educate them. Now it's not acceptable because you have control, and your attention span, some would argue, is less than a goldfish. So if organizations want to communicate, first they have to be relevant. And how do you be relevant to people? You either are useful to them or you entertaining the shit out of them. See, I did the first swear word, right? So, you know, it's just, especially in social media, you're either entertaining or you're useful, or you got no business being there. And the question, I guess, is that where, well, development is concerned, are you useful to your audience, or are you bloody entertaining to your audience? If you're none, why should the audience pay attention to you and do what you want them to do?
This is, I guess, the second part of this is from a development perspective, right? I imagine, I always feel as a marketer that I'm a fucking asshole. You're like, you asshole, you are selling Coca-Cola. That is what you're doing. You're going there and actually you're going there and selling things to people who don't want it. Back to kind of what Ong was actually saying. Actually, what we're trying to do, not in the selling Coca-Cola part, actually what we're trying to do is to go there and, especially for us, is say, how do we reinvigorate the creative economy to go there and actually so that the creative industry can be strong, the media industry can be strong and do this type of stuff. But in the same process, what we look at, and the way I've always looked at marketing, why I am a marketer, is that when it comes to the likes of brands, as Ong said, once upon a time had a lot of money, and they still have a lot of money. And they are the people that pretty much, I would probably argue a little bit, that they do actually dictate consumerism. And I look at brands, consumerism, as something that needs to be hacked. It needs to be fixed. It needs to be changed. It needs to fundamentally be realigned. But when you... And so to understand that, you need to understand what is that beast of communication. Why is it that entertaining content, why is it that informative content is winning? And fundamentally, this is where it gets down to this game of saying, if you don't understand that consumer, which is what is driving them, which is what Coke will invest in, and what Unilever and what these brands will invest huge amounts of money, if you don't understand what they're doing, you're basically just giving the game away, and they are going to outmaneuver you and outplay you and invest more money, and they may not do a great job of it, but they will spend more money and beat you. So as comms, as development people, you've got to go there and say, well, actually, what is my objective? What am I trying to achieve here? And if it's to have a meaningful impact on the majority of this population and for good, then you've got to learn the tactics, the secrets, so that you can actually then make a real friggin' difference. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I think that's a good point. Like, especially in the development sector, especially in Jakarta, there's so many initiatives, there's so many efforts, and you know, I don't think it should be so much about competition, maybe so much in the consumer commercial sector, but what are the tactics that can make you stand out and make you relevant, again, to your audience? So we've just heard a lot about the problems, and we've touched a little bit on what needs to be done, but perhaps we can start breaking it down. What is a good communication strategy, and how do you go about it? Who wants to start with this one? Because I know Patrick's got a plan, but maybe you want to have something to bring in first?
Strategy is, I think, a word that communicators love because it bamboozles everyone. Is, you know, what's a strategy, right? To me, it's very simple. You got point A, which is where you are right now. So it's taking into account of what you are, the challenges you face, etc. Point B is your objective. Where do you want to be? If you totally succeed with whatever you do, what would have changed? Would you have changed someone's behavior? Would you have, you know, increased awareness on something? Would people appreciate it more? Would their attitudes change? That's point B. So how you get from point A to point B is your strategy. And it's as simple as that, but it's also very difficult to actually get right. And, you know, I work with a lot of young PR aspirants, and it's amazing how difficult it is for people to do that. But that's what I would think strategy is. And you know, communications at the end of the day is a tool. As an organization in development, you want to achieve certain objectives. The question is, can you use communications to help you achieve that? And if you can, then these are the questions that you ask. What's point A? What's point B? How do you get there? And then the rest is just tactics and execution.
So Patrick, maybe you want to elaborate more on how do we break it down? If this is so simple, why isn't it working? And what are the key simple steps? Do you want me to go to the slide?
Go for it. So Ong just did a great overview of that. And I literally was chatting to Beck earlier this afternoon and struggling on writing this slide for you guys because from a strategy perspective, it's so simple, strangely enough. But I guess, as Ong mentioned, it strangely gets complicated. So it starts with defining your objectives, which is where you are, where you're going to, as Ong mentioned. And then it's going to say, actually, I'll talk about this in a second, but then it's actually going to come up with what actually is your communication objective or the strategy you want to achieve to make that happen. Create content, which is actually to say that this is our idea, we're now going to go and then deliver on that. Distribute that content on the best, most effective channel for your audience, which doesn't have to be Facebook, it can be different kind of forms of people. Measure, learn, and optimize, and basically get better over time and time again. Now this, again, is like, the funny thing about this is why I was struggling with this, is that it's so ridiculously simple. It's like, oh, we're going to define the problem, come up with our idea, create content, distribute it, measure and optimize, but people struggle. And this is where it gets kind of frustrating. So you define the objectives. And actually, this is where it goes down to what the first point I mentioned, the last comment, is that the objectives that you're really you're asking yourself, like, are they even the right objectives? Are what you're trying to actually change for your particular person, for the society, are they the right objectives? Like, if you impact, and this is, I understand development can be so, it can suck you in to say, you know, I can go there and help one person, and you could spend all your time investing that person, but the efficiency of your time has kind of been lost. when you could also say that I could spend less time with that one person, at the same time work on with 10,000 people via a common strategy, change their lives fundamentally for the better. And that balance of, I understand how difficult that could be from a communications or from a development perspective is, but actually setting that objective, that's where you've got to really look at yourself and what you're trying to achieve, and as your business or your organization is trying to achieve, and how to make that happen. Now, making the communication strategy is pretty damn easy because everyone's got an idea and everyone's got a kind of point of view about that. So people don't really fuck that one up too much because, everyone is, we get that. We'll come up with an idea. It goes to creating content. It goes to saying we're going to take this content and actually make this happen for many different reasons. Oh, we don't have budgets. We don't really like it. This is good enough, right? If we have this, if we make this impact, it's strong enough to and have the whole effect and teach people about who we are, build our reputation, drive them to go there and actually make a difference. It doesn't work that way, I'm afraid. Actually, we underestimate this massively. Distribution, again, for the majority of you, I guess for you guys in the comms sector and the development sector, you probably shouldn't even really be looking at digital. And I'm making a huge sweeping generalizations here, but you probably shouldn't. There's 150 million people on digital and social media right now for Indonesia. You're probably not focusing on the people of Jabotek. You're probably focused on the people who are way, way outside, etc. And so you're probably thinking newspaper, radio, community groups, they're probably your key channels, but we don't focus on that. And we're not measuring at all. And to the honest truth about this is that I'm going to make a real good guess is that in 2 years' time, the majority of you have gone to another post, and as a result, the things that took 2 years, 3 years to actually measure, or even longer, you're not really going to put in, process that place to even say, how do we then go back to the beginning? We lose that process, and it goes round and round and round again. So we have these circles spinning again and happening. And again, it's simply put, it's that strategy, that's all these pieces, and we're frustrated, we're tired of this process happening, especially when it comes to dev. But this actually, and this is where I'm don't also worry or I worry about it, but get pissed off about it, but this is actually happening in the whole marketing industry, the whole communication industry. They're all struggling at this at the same rate and same speed. But it's frustrating. So to strategy, that's how we would say strategy. So do your very best to say, really, what is our objective? Really, actually, how can we achieve that objective in different ways? Or have a hypothesis how you can achieve that objective. Create content. I'll show you the next slide about this. Create content, distribute it in an effective manner for the person you're trying to reach, and go there and actually measure the work that you're doing. Let me go to the next slide as well. So this is something that is simple tactics 101 now, all right? And this is kind of called, when it comes to marketing, it's all about awareness. So who the hell am I? They know that you exist. The next part, as Ong was saying, was interest, which is education. Desire, which is almost entertainment, is basically saying, okay, I'm willing to learn more about you as a brand. And actually, you know what? I'm willing to learn about you because it's interesting, compelling content. But also, at the same time, actually learn what it is that you do. And finally, the last piece of content to actually go there and take action, to make people actually to go there and actually do what you're trying to originally in the last slide get them to do. And I say this because I gave a really good workshop. I don't know if anyone's from Greenpeace is here, but I gave a workshop around about a year ago to Greenpeace. And fantastic people, absolutely lovely people, and who do phenomenal work. And this was all about, I'm not sure who knows about this, it was about some of the work they were doing for Cirebon, and about basically protesting coal. And the thing about this is they did a fantastic, what do you want to call it, grassroots activation campaign kind of piece of work. So they did this amazing piece of awareness campaign. And they invited the BBC, they invited Reuters, and they basically got a few people to go there and actually write up about them. So in that area, they did an absolutely fantastic job. But actually what the purpose of them doing this was to try and go there and actually go all the way back to the end, was to get and to change policy about coal. And the people who were changing policy about coal were in the government. And what happens in this kind of situation, or actually what's going on with Greenpeace, is that when it came to interest, which is actually the question here is, why the hell is coal bad? Nobody was creating content to say, why is coal bad? So these people are like, okay, Greenpeace is going there and hijacking a ship. There's no content that I can find that's saying, why is coal bad? And why actually they are hijacking the ship. And they haven't gone there and actually said, what are we trying to achieve by hijacking the ship? They hadn't created a site saying, petition this minister, send him an email, send him a letter, call him up, and tell him to go there and stop coal. They hadn't done this. Don't get me wrong, they created a fantastic piece of awareness piece that got picked up by the media, but they hadn't done these other areas of this. And as a result, the government, as they are, is their right to do, they went there and said, okay, so Greenpeace are basically saying that they're going to stop a ship, therefore they are terrorists, therefore they are people who are actually slowing down the economy, and they can easily spin this into a tale to say Greenpeace is basically slowing Indonesia down from a development or country development perspective. Therefore they are against this. So I go back to this kind of piece about changing brands, understanding the government that you're going against, and the people you're going to change all the policy machines on this. You're making it too easy. If you don't get involved in communications, you're basically going there and doing this snazzy thing that has a great impact in the very short term, but everything else goes to waste. Because they can spin it on you and they can turn it around on you because you haven't covered your bases and you haven't done the 101 stuff that actually makes an impact. And that is what is hella frustrating and why it's so simple, this stuff, but it really will help to go there and fix some of those problems on that. So.
Thanks so much, Patrick. I'll leave this slide up for a little bit if people want to kind of reference it. And I think the Greenpeace, it was a really good example. I think it helps add context to why a strategy is important. And before I ask Ong if he has a good example, I have a really simple one, and it's to do with the Forum Kelapa Sawit Berkelanjutan Indonesia, which I think quite a lot of you might know about. It's a palm oil platform, and it's supposed to be led by the government. But when I first came, and it was the UNDP is supporting it, so they had called it the Indonesia Palm Oil Platform, and we had a serious problem because we were trying to claim that this platform was led by the government and our target audience was the government, yet a lot of the people we were targeting, especially in rural areas, don't speak English. And how are they supposed to lead a platform that is, the title is in English? Who are we actually targeting? When we changed the title, Forum Kelapa Sawit Berkelanjutan Indonesia, everyone in the government was like, oh, we get it, after 2 years. So I don't know, I think that's quite a simple example, but it shows you just like really considering who your audience are and what the objective is can make a huge difference. Do you have a good example, Ong?
I do, except that I was told that I cannot mention the NGO because they want to be under the radar on this thing. They want to get it effective, but they can't seem to be involved. But I'll tell you the principles involved. They are involved in trying to change policy that a lot of sectors, especially in rural Indonesia, do not want change, because if that change comes, then a lot of opportunities for corruption go away. Right? So sounds familiar with most of you guys, right? So now what they wanted to do was to explain why this initiative had to be done. But we said, look, that's the wrong way. You do not appeal to logic. Human beings, right? We all think that human beings are logical creatures. They are not. They, you know, if you read Daniel Kahneman, Fast Thinking, Slow Thinking, we all go by heuristics. We all go by emotions, right? There's this reptilian brain which processes emotions. You get through that filter, you start talking to me. You don't get through that filter, talk to the hand, right? So basically, the whole thing is this, is that what we did was with them is that we transformed it into something very simple, very tangible, and very emotional, right? It involves some videos that can be uploaded and shown in this laya in kampongs. So basically, the whole thing about I think communications and development sector is that very often people make the assumption that if you can only explain to them, if they can only understand what this problem is about, they would change. I don't think they would. The other assumption that a lot of us make, and this is borne out by something called design thinking, is that we assume that people are very highly motivated. So if you tell them something, they would go and do something fairly difficult because they've seen the light. Truth, people are very lowly motivated most of the time. So you got to make the tasks very simple. Task. Then they are incentivized to make a harder task. And unless you can boil down the communications to that, I think it is very hard to get a very successful communication.
Thanks. I mean, if you don't want to add anything more on the strategy side of things, Patrick.
Again, like to Ong's point, right? So what he's saying is that they did a great, like what he's saying is that if you just do this, people are not going to jump to that. That's it. That's all he's saying. And it's so friggin' obvious when you realize that you just got to literally be like, this goes to this, goes to this. And to the simple point of saying, this is what we're trying to do. As a next step, we would like you to do this. If you do that, we put these links on our websites for our clients, and they get 15% of people will click through. And I'm not joking you, like 80, 90% of clients forget to put the friggin' link. So that you're literally like, what do I do next after this? What am I trying to achieve out of that? Which is just to move them down the funnel and to another, hopefully, piece of content or a story or whatever you want to say.
So with a little bit more time to go, not too much, don't want to bore you or anything, maybe it'd be great to touch a little bit more on these tools. So once you've got this solid strategy, you've really considered your objectives and you know what your goal is, you know what the action is that you want people to take, there's an array of different tools, and not all of them are suited to whatever it is that you're trying to do. I'd like to talk a little bit about media, especially because we've got Ong here, and he has an amazing background in journalism, which you've brought into the PR industry. And from personal experience, I know that, at the UNDP, I'm often asked, oh, we've got to write an op-ed on this. We've just got to get it published, and people will know what we're talking about. They'll know what side we're taking. So I'd really like Ong to kind of elaborate on that and talk about media and explain how do we actually use this tool and when is it important?
Well, media is depressing, right? Compass, the biggest media group, they've closed a lot of magazines and Bola and all that. Femina is in deep trouble. Even Femina, bastion of womanhood in Indonesia, they are in deep financial trouble. All the publications are in deep financial trouble. A lot of them have closed down. Then you've got, say, people like Jakarta Post, deep financial straits to the point that they cannot hire a decent copy editor. So my hobby now is to look at the headlines and go, oh, how bad, right? So basically what's happened, so newspapers are closing down. Very few reporters are left. If you look at the foreign correspondent scene, very few foreign correspondents are there. There's only stringers. Usually after college, they come, they're willing to work for cheap, not necessarily experienced, not necessarily knowledgeable, but these are your new gatekeepers. So then you say, well, why deal with the media at all? Now, with the conventional media, you need to deal with them because they still give you a certain credibility and legitimacy. To see it in print gives you that. Plus, all the bapa that you deal with in the government read newspapers, right? So they look at it. I mean, an extent of how important it is still is that we have a media monitoring department that monitors over 200 publications with about 25 people there that's churning out reports after reports every day. And we monitor 200 over publications for our clients. And that's how important it is, the conventional media. Of course, then, there is now, a lot of them are not making money with print, so they're moving online. Except that they're not finding the money online as well. A lot of money is probably going to the YouTubers and, you know, and bloggers and all that Patrick deals with, right? So, but that whole area is very complicated because you have your bloggers, your influencers, your KOLs, and then you got the media abal, right? Which is all nonsense media. 3 people get together, they set up a website, call it something like kawensiri.com, right? You get all this stuff, right? So there's a lot of this. And then, of course, you've heard of Saracen that, you know, had all these thousands of accounts and the campaign against Ahok. Fake news has got a new dimension in Indonesia. So what we find in social media is that there is a lot of noise, but very little signal. If thetek.com or compass.com wrote something, you would see a lot of retweets, but no comments. So what does that mean? To me, to us, we say that means nothing. So you got to be very careful in a sense as to whether to move into social media or not. As Patrick said just now, if you're talking to people in kampungs and out in the province, are they looking at social media? Do you know, for instance, that there is, I don't know the exact figure now, but it's probably around 30%. 30% of Facebook users do not access Facebook with a smartphone. You go, what? Yes, they access it through a feature phone, through SMS. This is the kind of phenomenon that you deal with when you get out of Jakarta, get out of the big cities. It's a whole different world. So you got to look and say, well, how do I connect with them? And what are the channels that are effective?
And speaking of social media, I forgot, but the Jakarta Development Network launched its Twitter account a few hours ago. And yes, so please follow, because I think it reaches our objective. I mean, Jakarta is the Twitter capital of the world, so really let's show that, and maybe we can get 100 followers by the end of the night. But do tweet some things about this panel, and I think we've got a hashtag running, which is just hashtag JDN. I just have one quick last question on the media. Okay, so if you've decided that media is useful for whatever you're doing, whatever your organization's trying to achieve, how do you actually engage the journalists? Do you just send a press release on?
Okay, for us, it's karaoke and durians, right? Okay, journalists are like you and I. We're all human beings. Believe it or not, journalists are human beings. They like feeling appreciated, especially in Indonesia. You know, this pendekatan is very important, right? So consider the life of a journalist. You all don't want to talk to them. If they call you up, you say, sorry, no comment, right? But the only time that you want to talk to them is when you want to launch a project that nobody understands, right? And then you call them and you expect to use them because you expect them to carry the news. So the journalist is over there, well, you know, screw these guys, you know. When they need me, they call me. They don't need me, they don't talk to me. So relationship with the media is exceptionally important, especially Indonesian media, because especially the junior ones, there's a huge turnover, right? So you need to do this as a continuous exercise. So what we do, for instance, is that we discovered that a lot of them love karaoke. So we do this contest. We call it My Voice. And, you know, we have elimination rounds. It's all on social media because journalists are all on social media. And there's a finale where we get about 100 odd reporters coming. And then they all have a good time. And that's it. We don't expect them to report. We just expect to have a good time with them. They have a good time. The other thing we do is that durian season, we say, okay, right, let's have a durian party. Invite them. Again, easily you get 80 to 100 journalists coming. And that's it. You just sit down, you have a nice chat, crack a few jokes, eat lots of durian, and offend everyone the next day. But that's how you build that relationship. And in Indonesia, I think this is exceptionally important. You don't have a relationship with them, and they can make life difficult, or at least ignore you.
Go ahead.
I'd probably add, I think that durians and karaoke is a great way from an entertainment perspective to kind of fit one of these ones. From something we do when we run our own events is actually we make them media partners. We make them special kind of guests on the events we're doing there, and they have exclusive access to report on it. And actually what we're really doing is we're just kind of creating good content for them so they can exclusively do their job for. And we've been doing this now for the last year and a half, and just they look at it saying, well, actually, this is a company who's feeding me interesting, good, relevant stories that is meaty. So you may look at this and say, well, in the organization, what I'm like, the goals I'm trying to achieve, like who actually would be these publications that I could partner with in a more substantial way to have is this something we can join together? And it probably won't be the likes of a Compass or a Detic or a Tempo who have kind of their standards to uphold, but you can go there and say, okay, we are all about abortion, okay, or all about kind of like, therefore we're going to work with some of the female publications who really take a stand on this, and then say, well, actually, can we like partner with you on these different elements to make it happen? And we've found success in that. We do it from marketing, but I'm pretty sure there's other journalists out there who just want to be actually having an interesting story with an event with money behind it that you want to make happen.
I mean, I think I'm halfway between a former journalist and now in the communication sector. I think I've spent equally the same amount of time, and it's a little bit disappointing actually, the relationship between the media and the development sector. There's definitely hostility, and I think it comes through misunderstanding. There's actually a lot that we could do to support each other, and I understand PR versus the media, like there's a role for each. But at the same time, when you consider an issue like climate change, everyone is so confused about that, and it's something we should have got right from the beginning. And when you think about the development sector, we produce studies and we produce all of these important statistics and material, so we can find a way to engage the media and support them with that kind of content. Then we actually are working together towards a common agenda, in a way. Last question. So we've got this strategy all together. Everything's clear. We know if we're going to work with the media or not. We know we're going to build a relationship. I think you mentioned this before, Patrick. The common issue is they say, well, we don't have any money. Like, we're an NGO, or we're in the development sector. Like, how are we supposed to invest in this? And is it even important? Like, we need to spend the money out in the field. What do you say to that? And how can people be creative about finding resources?
So yeah, budget issues, I'm afraid, is not an issue you can raise up these days anymore. Because if we're going back to Greenpeace now, what am I talking about when it comes to a video or even an article which talks about coal? This is something that's going to cost you. If you're getting a really well-done article written, 1 million, 2 million rupiah for a good journalist to actually go there and give you a pretty good breakdown of what is the problem. If you're going to turn that into a nice video, speak to Nadia, but also like speak to us, but it's like 10, 15 million for a very simple, like, this is the problem with coal. And if you do it, then literally a problem is like, from SEO perspective, from a search perspective, like the question they will type in, I can pretty much guarantee you that the quality of content out there about that is very poor right now. I'll challenge you, the majority of you right now, or in the next like 24 hours, go there right now and go to Google, translate your, the key term that you want to know. So let's say, what is abortion? And see kind of what is coming up on top of those ranks and who is actually scoring there. And for the price of a 1 million or 2 million rupiah, could you actually be the ones that can help give like an informative piece of content in that regard? And we're not talking crazy money here. We're just talking making sure you're just thinking about all these different questions they will have, and then again, have a call to action. So once you were saying, oh, this is what abortion is, do you now want to kind of learn about these other things? Off we go, and you're down that rabbit hole, and you're letting them kind of find their own way, etc. And you can say, actually, you know what? Okay, there's no way, like, what is an abortion? That is something that is so competitive from a media perspective. You say, okay, well, therefore we need to either A, work with an influencer or media and partner with them saying, okay, we're going to do a series of something that believe about this, and use their clouts, their reputation to actually help you get that message up there and the call to action there. That's how you do it. And budget is not an issue anymore. I'm sorry, but it's like you can't blame it, because the price of content, unfortunately, I say this unfortunately, it's something we believe in actually helping creators make a living creating content. It's not as expensive as you think it is, and there's no more excuses.
But it also still costs money. I'm just thinking about, like, you know, a lot of the time, I mean, I understand it's not expensive, but also, you know, I might have a manager who comes to me and says, but what percentage of our budget do we need to invest? Like, do you have any guidance on that? It's a hard one to...
Are you talking percentage in terms of the whole spending from an organization, or are you talking from just from a comms budget?
I'm talking, yeah, from a whole budget perspective. Like, I'm
Okay.
concerned that people might go back and say, oh, comms is not very expensive, we don't have to invest in it. Like, while it doesn't cost much to create a piece of content, it's important to devote funds towards, right?
It's a hard question, because again, different industries, different sizes will really vary. Let's say, for example, maybe to make this easy and clear. So we're a startup. Not that many people know about us, though we're getting more awareness. The startup rules dictate that I should be pretty much spending 50% to 250% of my monthly revenue just on comms and marketing and sales elements of that. So essentially, in your terminology, it would be actually saying that anywhere between 50%, because again, I would say that your issues are under not that many people know about it. You probably should be spending 50% plus of your budget on the communication alone, if not more than that, to actually go there and to get the message out there. Because otherwise, it's going to like, yeah, then it's back to this first thing I said, is that you'll help 10, 100 people, but the other 10,000 people who you can actually go there and actually like give them that lifeline, they won't know about what even is happening, and they won't even reach out and kind of find you. So I would say probably even for you guys, 50 to 100%. I think, I don't know if you know stat.
Thanks. But, you know, also visibility brings in money too. Like, if you're concerned about donor money, which is obviously a big concern for a lot of people, if you're not visible, if donors don't understand what you're doing, then you're not going to get any more investment. I'll just give it to you, Ong, before we go to the audience. I just wanted to give you a chance to explain maybe what you're doing at Maverick with NGOs. I think it was Catalyst, you said?
Okay. Yeah, we run. Any of you are from local NGO? No local NGO? Local NGO. Okay, you're eligible for this program. We run Catalyst because we realize that a lot of NGOs do good work. But they are actually very bad communicators a lot of times. So we said, okay, what could we do for the community at large? We don't have lots of money, so we can share our expertise. So we do this every quarter. It's a program called Catalyst. People can sign up. And we would run one-day workshops on how they can use communications to greater effectiveness. It may be a certain aspect of it, like, you know, how to do fundraising using communications, or, you know, how to use social media, for instance. So we do that with the local ones. We haven't done it with international NGOs because our perception is that you guys have a lot of money, just don't want to spend it on communications. But okay, if you are an international NGO and there's no money, really, communications is not really rocket science, right? There's a plaque in my office that I stole the words from Harold Evans, the editor of the Times of London. And it just says something very simple, which is what we do at heart. Make anything complex sound simple. Make anything simple sound important. If it's not simple and important, in other words, it's relevant to your audience, you're not going to connect with them. So really, I mean, I think you guys, a lot of you guys are smart guys. You can figure it out. Just follow that dictum. Make anything complex sound simple. Make anything simple sound important. And you could actually figure out how best to communicate. The problem in the development sector is that sometimes they make something simple sound totally complex, right? And that bamboozles everybody.
Go ahead.
One last thing I would say about this is please just start. Like, when people have this, and I know this, we're a company that sells marketing like solutions. People have this kind of belief that you need to go there and from day one be the very best in the whole industry, etc. And actually you don't. You just need to be doing one small little test and going there and saying, my business objective is this, I think I'm going to solve it this way, I'm going to try and do my best to measure the outcome. And you say, you know, I'm going to spend like 10 million rupiah on this, and I'm going to go there and after a month see that actually that gave me 2,000 people looking at that. Okay, interesting. Like 2,000 people looking at that. The price of that, therefore, is a CPV, cost per view of 200 rupiah per person doing that. Okay, interesting. I now go back to my boss and say, hey, boss, this was 200 rupiah. I think if you give me not 10 million, but 15 million, I may be able to get 3,000 people looking at this. And that'd be fantastic. And just start small. Small tests. And you mentioned something like design thinking, which is literally just what I was showing back there. It's just that process. Start small and just show that numbers those results and just ramp it up and up and up and up. And it doesn't have to be this, okay, we need $100,000 to go there and just take over. It doesn't need to be that. It can be so small, but as long as you're testing it, you have this evidence and proof and you just go from there.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. But I think we started this panel saying there's a misunderstanding with communication. So if you can prove it to the people you work with, this is what you're going to get out of it if you invest just a smaller little amount. Imagine if you invest a tiny little more increment. Imagine if you invest a little bit more, and it just develops that way. So I think we've taken way over time, the 30 minutes that I promised. So I understand if you want to get chatting, but if there's any questions, we have a little bit of time for questions. Does anyone want to ask these guys anything, anything that kind of stood out or you want to follow up on? Janvi?
So I was really fascinated with the example you gave of Greenpeace because I am an ex-Greenpeacer. But in India, we let the message control us and got completely decimated, kind of with the government controlling all of the perception publicly about what Greenpeace was as an organization. And I used to work for the nuclear campaign, so it was the standard message of this organization is against India's development and India's growth. So my question really is about how do you recover from that? Because you as an organization are aware that your cause is worth fighting for. It is important information that needs to be communicated to the public. But you've got this message that's now controlling your campaign. So how do you recover?
I think, so I have friends who work at Greenpeace China. And I think one of the things they did a really good job of is actually just writing and building a blog. And again, blog is like 101. The thing about this is that the government have so many battles to fight. Greenpeace is definitely on their radar as this one individual item. But this is something that you can literally go to them day after 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 day, and keep on going there and actually reiterating that message, so then explaining what it is you're doing. So just work out exactly what are they repositioning on, which is, I would imagine, what is nuclear, and actually what is Greenpeace's role in this and trying to do this. And B, you just go there and keep on repeating that message again and again and again, because they will lose, they have to lose, they don't have time to fight you every single day on that. So yes, it's going to be initially frustrating, but you'll just grind them down. And that's the only way I would suggest doing that. And same for all of you out there, it's just, you don't need to win it today. Please understand this. This is not a, like day one, this is a 1 year later we do this. And the reason why I mentioned Greenpeace China is because again, they were getting bombarded on every single side of this. But this blog that they were writing is just literally communicating and trying their best to be a bridge blog and explain what's happening there. It ended up with like 100,000 plus kind of views happening. And it was being done by like 2-3 writers. That's all it takes. So just start, and yeah, that's what I'd say.
I think when you deal with governments in China, India, Indonesia, they're not the most rational of people, right? And there's nothing, when they're cornered, they will raise the specter of nationalism. And it's very hard because at the end of the day, they control the institutions of power, they control the levers of power. So I don't think there's a cookie cutter solution, but I would start to look at what commonalities there are, because if you have no commonalities, there's no basis for agreement. But if you can have the commonalities and you stress the commonalities, like both of us want a certain good result from there, then you start building from there, and I think you would have enough common ground to make peace. And very often that may involve appearing like you're giving ground to the government. That's the way it is. These guys are not rational.
I think the commonality is a really good point. And I have another simple example from my work in palm oil. I went in there really green, naive, foreign, you can imagine, to the government. And I remember drafting a brochure and I mentioned the word deforestation. Well, that was my first week of work in the toilets crying because, I had these parts and they were really mad at me. And, of course, it took me a while to understand the context. And then we, again, found that common ground. Of course, at the UNDP, we're about development and we're about enabling good growth. And that's what the government wants to do as well, especially at the Ministry of Agriculture. So that's where we found the common ground, and that's where we're working on sustainable development. Is there any other questions? Maybe, hang on, I'll come. Do you want me to come to you, or it might be a bit hard? Hang on.
Hello, my name is Leah Kristiani. I work for Center for Detention Studies. We have vision that community-based correction is implemented in Indonesia. But the condition right now is our society and also the government is so punitive and retributive. So it's hard to promote this program about community-based correction. And maybe you have an advice or experience about the untuk mengubah mindset yang masih punitif, karena mereka kan masih bahwa the offenders should be punished, should be jailed, but we will give the other option untuk mengatasi, untuk mentreatment mereka. Soalnya kondisi saat ini kan overcrowding, penjara penuh, dan kita membutuhkan strategi baru. Nah, menurut narasumber, strategi apa yang tepat untuk ini? Pertama sih untuk sebenarnya kami sudah memperkirakan untuk membangun awareness mereka, untuk memberikan pendidikan kepada mereka bahwa ada pilihan lain selain penjara. Tapi ini masih agak kesulitan, jadi minta saran.
Okay. Just if you are more comfortable in asking your questions in Bahasa Indonesia, please feel free. We'll find a way to translate that for you. Thanks.
You're okay. It sounds like a lot about changing behavior, and I'll let Patrick go for it.
So it sounds like you are, again, Ong is going to be really good on this, so I'll let him defer to this in a second, but it sounds like, the problem you initially have right now is that nobody knows who you are, and nobody knows what you're doing, etc. So again, I go back to this and say number one problem is to say, what is your objective? Is to say, well, who the hell are we? And what are we even trying to do here in terms of this issue and this point of view about that? So you say, well, actually, it's just there. And I would love to say that you're going to go all the way down to the likes of a government and say, we're going to go there and change the nature of like this policy and change the whole perception when it comes to incarceration, etc. But it's not going to happen at all today. So one is, what is your objective right now? Your objective is to go there and actually get awareness about you guys and what you're doing and actually the bigger mission purpose of that. And then it goes down to say, well, next question is saying, how do we do that in a creative way from communication standpoint way that, again, I don't know who your audience are. If it's the bigger public, an idea that I would say is you go there and say, well, you think that these people are being unfairly treated in jails. How do you humanize them? How do you go there and actually say that these are real, these are your brothers, your fathers, your wives, your daughters, etc. How do you go there and actually literally put a face on that person? Is that the cheapest, most cost-effective way? It's an Instagram account saying click, 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 click. This is the story of this person. This is the story of this person, etc. And try and get people to pick it up. That's me going from there saying your objective is awareness. Your target audience is the likes of the general public. Therefore, you need reach, you need mass awareness, you have no budget. Therefore, the cheapest thing you can do is create kind of simple stories around that, and you go from there to try and get awareness about this different issue initially, and you move down that funnel. And then you can start hammering on different issues about what we're trying to achieve from articles, from your website, the collateral you're going to create. You start interviewing people in policy making, saying what is going on with this different situation, and you move down that funnel and funnel until eventually you get to that point saying we're trying to change this. How we do that? That's how I would do it as somebody with no money and I'm going to guess limited resources right now. That's how I would start it from a very following that point of view.
I don't have a definite answer for you, but I think some questions might help you focus on the problem at hand. And the first question you ask is, who's your target audience? Is it the public? Why would the public matter? Or is it certain ministers? Or is it certain politicians? Or is it a certain political party? What is the target, right? And then you ask yourself, why aren't they buying into this? Now, if you can answer these questions, then the next task is to find ways to influence them. It may not be a huge communications program. It may be something as simple as, hey, go to an arisan with the wife because the wife controls the minister. It may be something like that, right? The levers of power, in a way, when you do something like that, you got to understand the politics, the levers of power. Read Machiavelli, read Sun Tzu. This is what needs to be done, because what you have to do is to be brutally focused on what you want to achieve, right? And if that requires you to do mass communications, then that's good. But otherwise, there are some things that can be achieved without communicating to the world, without taking newspaper ads, without doing a press conference even, right? It all depends on who do you want to influence, what do you want them to do, what does it take for them to change their minds. Bisa?
I just wanted to add one last thing. I think, again, that's really good advice on picking your audience. But what I found, particularly working in palm oil, sometimes it's really hard to know which audience to start with, because it sounds like you could have a few different options. So then it comes down to which stakeholders do you want to prioritize first if your resources are limited. And then it goes on to what Patrick was saying is you know, having short-term goals as well. So think about who your allies are in the beginning. Like, who are your friends? Who could you get to champion this work? Who's the low-hanging fruit in the beginning? And then work your way up from there.
Any other questions?
Hi, thank you so much for the talks. My name is Hanga. I'm currently working with OECD. I'm actually want to touch upon a very important point that Rebecca has mentioned about how to translate the development product into a proper communication form. I'm just wondering, like, if you have any more ideas to talk about on that topic, because most of the time we actually produce in development work, there's ton of jargons, tons of statistics, like a very unsexy product for public and as well as for government. And in your work experience, can you share with us how do you try to unpack those documents and pack it into something that is more, you know, more people friendly per se? Yeah.
I'll say something quickly from my experience. I think it's an excellent question, and it's something that I come up with all the time. And actually, my first barrier is explaining to my team. Just because you understand it doesn't mean they do. So I think once you get across that, then you can start looking at the products. And it goes back again to showing them an example. Like, okay, this brochure might look basic, but don't worry, let's see how our audience reacts to it. And then you can say, look, we had a lot more engagement with that compared to your 200-page study. Why don't you think we should try and invest in that again and see what else it brings? Sorry.
Normally what we do is we do what we call the 300-year-old exercise. We get people to imagine that they're talking to someone from 300 years ago, so 1700, Indonesia 1700. And we get them to explain what an iWatch is, right? Try explaining to someone from 300 years ago what an iWatch is. All of a sudden, they realize that they have to do several things. One is that they got to go into that world, figure out what the audience understands or doesn't understand, and explain it to their term, in their terms, right? The other thing is that you have to be very selective with your information. I think development people, because of the science or pseudoscience background, want to be very comprehensive. It's like lawyers that write a sentence that lasts that long with 15 commas in it, right? Comprehensiveness is the enemy of excess, right? If your information is not accessible in the first place, doesn't matter how comprehensive, how much information you have, how important it is, nobody gives a flying F, right? Nobody's going to read you. Nobody's going to pay attention to you. So this is the enemy, I think, of a lot of development people. A wish to be so comprehensive in your information that you cover all the bases. You cannot. The mind does not process information that way. So it's to make it all sound, again, make anything complex sound simple, anything simple sound important. It's important if it's relevant to you. It's important if it addresses your needs, your fears, right? Anything else is superfluous. So the whole thing, again, is just to boil it down to what is most important, and what is most important to your audience, not to you. This is the mistake that corporations and organizations do. You want to say what's important to you. Who cares, right? I media train people from banks, and they tell, one of their key messages is, we've been around for 200 years. Yeah, and that's why the government has got to bail you out, right? But, things like that, it's important for them, but it's not for their audience. The audience over there, okay, you've been around 200 years, so what? Big effing deal, right? So, the whole thing is to be relevant and keep it simple and make it accessible rather than comprehensive.
So you guys are going to hate me for this, but I'm going to you, go and point back at this again and say that, okay, and this is kind of like what I was saying as well, this can be used on both a high-level strategic level, but also at a tactical level. And actually, Microsoft are let's not talk about other things, but Microsoft's pretty good. They used to be pretty good at this, actually making sure they're creating content at all different parts of that and what he's talking about. So from a purely ideation tactics standpoint, you say that right now you got your action. And here, I don't know if you guys can't read this, but this basically says low shareability, very high relevance. This is your white paper right now. This is your report that only about 300 people need to actually read. But you go this up here and say, well, actually, what's the next piece of content we're trying to do is actually raise the bigger key elements of that. So what would that be? Okay, that's going to be an interview that you can work with PR on if you want to, or work with the press on, about kind of those key elements and like parts of that, or even like an in-depth interview with the key proponents of that. Going back up to this interest phase, etc. Again, people who Ong is kind of starting to mention, like they're starting to care less about that core problem, but it's much more kind of top level, keep it simple, stupid stuff. Saying, actually, now we're at the point saying, what's the bigger problems you're trying to solve? And up to here in the awareness part, saying, well, what is that key one factoid that fundamentally changes things that you can literally go there and put it in the center of a social media post if that's what you want, or on the middle of your website and say, this is the only thing that we really care about that you kind of communicating back. You just go there and say, we have our white paper, we're probably missing out on our interviews, our case studies about this, we're missing out on kind of the other pieces, we're missing out on this like website, we're missing out on the social media elements of this simple cut down part. But every single one of this is going to say, they find us here, the simple stuff, and it drives down to the people who are saying, actually, I want to download this report. We release white papers ourselves. We literally track that says, this thing here gets 40,000 people looking at that content. And by the time it gets all the way down to this piece, it's at 1,500. And it's just a funnel going all the way down. And you can literally see it go from click, 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 all the way through. So it's a funnel. And it's very possible to do that. So.
Anyone else? Any other questions? Yeah.
Hello, I'm Maria. I'm working for a Swedish government initiative right now for a communication officer. I want to ask Patrick about the communication strategy because like the communication strategy is sometimes like it's pretty hard to measure. Or it's like, because in the development program, somehow we get influenced by the donor, like, you know, like donor driven kind of stuff. So I want to ask you how to measure to not really be a donor site, and what do you think about it?
How do you not be donor driven, basically?
No, I mean like. No, I was going to no, I mean like when you say donor driven, do you mean like can you elaborate on the problem a bit more?
So usually like the donor asks us to, you know, like do this. They have their own objective. So how to be like natural, to like to give like communication product whatsoever is neutral. So it's based on people, whatever.
I don't think your problem is the communications part and the measurement part. Your problem is the setting expectations part, right? Essentially, it's a whole skill set. We could sit here for days talking about how do you manage clients, right? Well, my point is that if you actually manage the client, the donor's expectations from the start, then you would be very clear, you would have an agreement, this is what we're trying to achieve. And then once you figure out what actually you want to achieve, remember, communications is a tool. You want to do something, you use this tool to help you achieve this thing, right? So the measurement depends on what you want to achieve and whether you achieve that, right? Or let's say you want to get more people participating in an event. Then you ask yourself, how will communications help you to do that? Then the measurement should be people that go to the event. Number one, is there more people that go to the event? Number two, is that people who go to the event, how did they know about that event? Right? So it depends. There is no measure. A lot of people use stupid things like, advertising equivalent, AVE, advertising value equivalent. These are totally wrong metrics. It's an advertising metric that has very little to do with communications. And these days, it's a bit more complicated because you've got to talk about PESO, paid, earn, shared, and own media. How do you, how do you trigger this kind of conversations in paid, earn, shared, and own? So again, it depends on where you want to go, what you want to achieve. The other thing that you need to do is also benchmark. Because let's say you do something and you get 50 media coverage, 50 media items covering your event. Is that good? Is that bad? Who's to say? Of course, if you're the communications officer, you go to your boss, say, wow, we got 50. Fantastic. Right? And somebody that doesn't like you, 50, the bitch. I could get 100, right? So again, it's benchmarking so that you could say, well, when we carried out something similar like that, we had 25 before, now we've got 50, we're making progress, right?
Yeah, I think Ong nailed it at the end. It's if I'm going to say your donors are kind of like almost acting like your boss in that regard, what you have to do is, one is that benchmarking process, saying actually we're going to run through a system where benchmarking is basically results and looking at the results saying, did this achieve our objective? And two is actually come up with that hypothesis of what is that benchmark you're trying to achieve. I have some of my team sitting in the very back over there. And to give you an example of like one of the things that I'm asking them to do right now is to tell me how many people do I need in India to cover the whole market. And straight up here, like they will not be able to answer this question correctly. And I'm not expecting them to do that, but all I'm expecting them to do is to A, go there and actually think about that strategy, which is the different place, and then come up with a reasonable estimate to say, okay, we need 100 people in India. And it may be the case that within 6 months we realize that actually, shit, we need 400 people in India, but at least we benchmark it saying this was our thinking on this and we were wrong in these different places. However donor, however boss, we've learned this and now we're going to go back and do this all over again, etc. So benchmark and the hypothesis is start on that front, but just have it. Don't not have it, because otherwise you're lost in the water and you're out to sea and you're going nowhere.
I just had a quick comment. It definitely resonates with me. We do the same thing. And I'm guessing maybe part of what you're saying too is that I think there's been this history with donors that they just want to whack their logo on everything. And I don't know, like I can't give you a clear answer to that, but something that I'm working on now is just working really closely with the donor if you can. You need to work with your team as well, but work with the donor and say, look, if you let me implement this strategy, you are going to get exposure, but you're going to get it in the right way. You're not going to get it in a way that's going to offend the stakeholders or turn them off. So I think the answer would be just to work closely with the donor and again show them the results of your work and explain it takes time. Yeah.
And for everyone out here, can I just make a small recommendation? Because I realize the development sector is incredibly competitive to go there and actually get into. You need a master's, you need a PhD, etc. I hear all the horror stories of this. All I would say is, strangely enough, as a former marketer myself and for the comms person myself, be nice to these people. They have this huge chip on their shoulder because they are selling Coca-Cola, and they will more than happily go there and actually sit down with you, give away workshops, literally teach you all this stuff because they want just a friend who can say, you know what, this weekend I helped out. I'm being dramatic, but they just want to say, you know what, this is my friend, this is helping me, because marketing is fantastic for them and teaching the skills, etc. But it is draining and it's tiring. So go there, find it, adopt a marketing friend. That should be my charity. So adopt a comms friend. He'll make you kind of happy. So they will teach you.
Okay, we have time for one last question.
Thank you for the thought-provoking discussion. My name is Nanda. I'm working in a development project on sustainable fisheries and marine conservation. I'm curious about your perspective on celebrity endorsement. There are a number of NGOs using celebrities to help promote their causes. Like WWF, they have Leonardo DiCaprio, UNICEF with their own Angelina Jolie. As communication people working in an NGO, is it advisable to sort of doing that approach? Are there any risks that we should prepare to mitigate those risks? And do you have any like a good or bad practices of doing celebrity endorsement that you could share to us? Thank you.
So, in short, should you work with celebrities? Hell yes, you should, because it's free awareness up to that point, etc. Yes, you know, go there and qualify them, make sure they're relevant, understand what they're trying to do. But basically, yes, you should, because a celebrity essentially is, I would say, more powerful than some of the media sources out there. And especially if you're trying to do this, like, just, yes, do it. It's a free, like, I can qualify the price of a celebrity. We have 2,500 influencers, celebrities ranked on the platform. You know, you're talking about 200 million rupiah is the price of some of these big name celebrities. So should you, just for a post, right? So if they're going to go there and give you 10 posts, that's worth 2 billion rupiah. So should you do that from a media value perspective? Yes, you should. Now I'm going to pass this over to Ong, who's going to give you the...
Okay. Celebrities, yes, depending on what you want to do. Okay, I work for Oppo, right? My client, and they've been using celebrities to great effect. They are now number 2 Android in Indonesia. So they use celebrities to great effect. But there's also a downside as well, in a sense that in the lower end, they've got the market covered. Upper end, not so much, because people's perception is that, hey, cheap Chinese phone, why should I use it? I want my iPhone 8, you know, even though I pay, you know, 6 months salary for it, I would still have an iPhone 8, gengsi dong, right? So now, for them, using those celebrities, Raisa and all that, it's great for the lower socioeconomic classes. But it's not going to cut eyes with people like you, because you would be more influenced by, say, Patrick using it, right? Than if Raisa use it, because you know that she's being bought. But it works. So again, it depends. People like Angela Jolie, etc., fantastic. You can get them. The amount of publicity you can get from there is great. The exposure is great. The downsides of celebrity is, what if you get a Tiger Woods, right? What if you get a Justin Bieber? It can work against you tremendously. So the risks are there, but the rewards are there as well. So, you know, you need to make a decision call on that. You need to do due diligence, and also to ask yourself, they are a celebrity, but are they the right celebrity? You know, are you thinking the right celebrity for you, for instance, right? So.
I mean, you know, the UN uses celebrities all the time. And I think this is really good advice. Just really think about your audience, because you've got to be careful not to trivialize the message. And then, you know, it's important that if you are communicating to the mass public and you do need to just get a simple message out there, they are an amazing vehicle to use to do that. But if it's something like palm oil again, we all remember Harrison Ford, and I'll leave it there, who came to Indonesia a couple of years ago.
Okay, any other questions? One last one, okay.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Aldi. I'm from KPK, Komisi Pemberantasan Korupsi. Currently, I'm working as a program coordinator for Deputy of Prevention, and I'm working on the development of communication strategy for corruption prevention. My question is, when your brand of your organization becomes too powerful for your communication programs, how you deal with it? You know, because I think the strategy for the communication strategy for prevention has to be different from the brand communication strategy of the organization itself, you know, because it's a different things. But I want to know what is your opinion about that, you know. Thank you.
As Uncle Ben would say, with great power comes great responsibility. But I think the KPK is doing a great job. I also know some people work with the KPK, and I think you guys have got a very good strategy because you guys are very forward thinking in the sense that you're dealing with people who deal with youth. So one of my friends is with the Tolak Reklamasi movement. He's got tattoos up the wazoo, right? And his appeal to the younger audience is there. And I think you guys have already got a great strategy in the sense that you're thinking ahead. Hey, the next generation, they're not going to read newspapers. They're not going to be influenced by old people. They're going to be influenced by younger guys, cool guys, guys with tattoos that, you know, do rockabilly and things like that. So I think it's great. I think KPK, especially in the Indonesian context, has got a great advantage because everyone knows that corruption is so bad here. And KPK are the good guys. The only thing I would say is to be very careful because sometimes when there's great power, arrogance sometimes seeps in. And if that happens, that would be very bad news for the KPK. But otherwise, I think you guys have got a good strategy. Carry on.
So, again, like, I would say there's a lot more questions I could ask of this, but it sounds like the way I interpreted your question was you were saying that actually we're doing good from a top line perspective and doing that. You're thinking ahead to say, well, actually, what happens when the world will start coming and starting to really look into you? And if I were to put on my creative hat here, again, or my strategic creative hat here, you don't need to do this. You don't need to explain who KPK is, but you need to go there and start actually showcasing and letting people look inside you to communicate transparency and communicate actually that you are people and and who you are, why you're doing this, etc. And again, this is a tactic. This is not strategy. This is going there and saying that, simply put, you need for people to think that you are real people, and you need to have the people in an organization to feel that as a government body who's so involved in this process, you need to make it transparent, open. So probably more so than your counterparts, you need to be communicating every single last thing so that when somebody goes there and says, what does the KPK can a person do every single day? They can go there and say, well, at 9 o'clock we do this, and 9:15 we do this, and 9:30 we do this, and 9:45 we do this. And when they go looking for those questions, you've already got all those questions laid out, down to the very molecule of like, how do KPK can do their tax returns? Oh, they do this, etc. And we do a fun day every Friday where we all count up our tax returns, and this is how we do it. You need to be doing that and thinking ahead. And again, the funny thing about that is that probably nobody's going to read it for a good long amount of time until they start wanting to kind of know, oh, wait a second, I wonder if KPK is even being transparent on their own side. Oh, wait a second, they're not. Wait a second, this is something we should look into. This is going to get bigger, and it'll start snowballing. So,
just to add, I don't know how far this is true, but this is anecdotal. Some of the perceptions about KPK that, you know, if I were to do an audit, I would look at is whether people feel that it's been infiltrated by religious hardliners. Because there is a perception out there, there's talk out there. Because you got people with beard like mine, right? A bit dark in the forehead, who actually have been playing huge roles. It may be true, it may not be true, but there is a perception out there, and I would, you know, as a KPK, I would look at the risk of that and manage that risk.
Well, That was the last question, right? I just say you've got a very interesting job, and I think you are doing a great job, and it's great that you're looking forward. So good luck with the kapaka. But yeah, just to close, it's been an amazing turnout, and it's been just such a great opportunity. Thank you to the Jakarta Development Network to give us this platform to actually talk about why communications is important, because I think if we get it right, there's, the world's our oyster. There's so much that we can achieve. And as Patrick explained, it is simple, If you follow these steps, if you measure everything, we can do a lot. And finally, just to say thanks again to Nadia and her team from AsiaWorks Media for capturing this event. So the video will hopefully be available soon online. If you want to share with any of your colleagues, especially those who you work with and you have to get on your side for communications and convince them why it's important. But if you have any questions about video, because we didn't get a chance to really talk about video, but that is really important. It's an important medium, especially online. Nadia's your girl, and she's just over there. I'll leave it to you, Tom.
Cool. Thank you so much, guys. I'd just like to, let's get another round of applause for Patrick, Beck, and Ong. And thank you to Nadia and her team, AsiaWorks. I think that the video from tonight will be up soon on some sort of platform, so we can look forward to that. And thank you to you guys for coming. It's great to see some familiar faces, but also some new ones. I think we're growing every month, so please follow us on social media. Yeah, as we said, we've got a new Twitter. The handle is JackDev Network, so check that one out. But anyway, thank you so much, and we'll see you again next month.